organizers, even if I'm able to get through to the end of my session. Now, can I share this? Can I share my screen, or is it okay for me to just speak freely? I'm happy to do. Okay, so let me just keep going. I'm not sure what the setup is like, but I think maybe just to say that empowering educators and students through IP awareness is one of those topics that for me is really exciting, because a lot of the work that we do as a UN organization or agency is really around empowering citizens, Nigerians, with IP skills and resources. And for us, the big question is, how do we grow that knowledge, as well as help people to recognize the importance and the proper use of IP rights, especially students and educators. And I'm talking, of course, in line with our current session. Now, what I want to be able to do today is to give you a little overview of where I think some of the issues are from an intellectual property perspective in this exchange between students and educators. I will speak very briefly, of course, about WIPO, and of course, a little bit about IP. So just what is intellectual property? I'm really glad just listening to the exchanges so far that many of you in the room are educators. So it's also nice to be able to highlight some common forms of IP in the context of what IP is. And of course,
you can share your screen, sir.
A few. Sorry?
You can actually share your screen, you're a co-host.
I can, okay. Let me do that then. Just give me 1 second. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, okay, I'm back on the first slide. Do you see my screen properly?
Okay, what we can see now is your mail. I think you've moved from Zoom.
Okay. So let me do it one more time. Apologies. Let me just do that again. So you can clearly see that I'm to be a major beneficiary of this learning session, because I'm struggling in this moment with my any luck?
Yes, we can see it clearly now, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's on display mode. Is it on?
Yes, it's on display mode, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much again, and apologies for that. So very quickly, as I was saying, let me even just start. I had wanted to, yes, give a quick overview, and as I said, just to highlight, to end with some of our tools and resources. Now that's the major question I wanted to answer today, but I thought I would start with a few scenarios. just in my mind, like Mr. Folorunshaw had done at the beginning. I know he had used a lot of stories. And I thought while looking towards the topic, how do I put this a bit in context? Now, let me give a very quick scenario. There is a music teacher, and the music teacher is trying to teach his or her his student, let me use that, the Handel's Messiah, a very difficult piece. Now, the student is struggling to get it, but is making lots of improvement. And eventually the student comes up with another form, another tune, but which is based on what he was trying to do. And I know sometimes when you're trying to learn something, you don't really get the original, but you now come up with something that you say, it's not the original, but it's also really good. And so the student has come up with this. Now, another student listens in on this session and records it with their mobile phone, all right? And this new piece that of course, this student has come up with is now something that is generating so much excitement. Now the teacher tells the third student to now prepare a score sheet for this new piece that the student has come up with, right? Now, if you think about that scenario, who owns, number one, the new music that was come up with? Now, who owns the score sheet that was prepared? And probably who owns the recording? So, and when I say who owns, that means that now, like, if they were going to try and commercialize any of these three, so for example, the student who recorded this new piece and put it on YouTube and was getting money from it, does the person own it? Does the person have the rights to do that? There's a new music that's come up. Who owns it? And what does it, before I even go on, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Okay, if there's none, let me give you another scenario. Maybe this one is going to make it. Or is
One
there someone
second,
that wants
sir.
to? Okay,
I want to say the student, the original student who created the tune.
okay. Owns everything. So owns the recording, owns the score sheet, and owns the music. Is
Okay. We have an original tune, right?
yeah,
And we have a score, right? And we
yeah,
have a recording. So these are different properties, right?
right.
So the student owns the student who brought about the new tune owns the first sound. The other who, modulated it has that part. Then the recording, because this is what you see also in the music industry. There's a producer, there's like a lyricist, there's someone who a vocalist, right? These are individual intellectual properties. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that. And I'm really glad that Alice is picking that picture that there are intellectual properties that are being generated even in that exchange between the student and the teacher. Now let's think about another one, which of course is also still very common, is there's a lecturer, a professor in a university who is coming up with research and is working with a student, a research student, and they come up with a new invention. Now, who owns that?
Okay, I would like to say that even from the perspective of publishing an article from any research work, the first time we got to be first authors was at doctoral level. Even at master's
Right.
level, the professor, the supervisor were still the first author. So I didn't get any right to be the owner of the article until PhD level. Not to mention of any invention, your name would not even get to be on the list.
Okay. Now, but then we have to ask ourselves the question, should this be so? And when we think about intellectual property, it challenges that very assumption because intellectual property can be owned by a child as much as it can be owned by a very senior person. So if a child comes up with a new creative or a new invention, meets the requirements, then that child should own the intellectual property. But I think we'll get to that in a minute. Now, of course, some of the common scenarios that I thought about, of course, talk about things like plagiarism within the campus setting. We have a lot of instances of photocopying, excessive photocopying, like a lecturer says, this is the recommended text, and then it's just photocopied at scale and distributed to everyone. Again, it's a violation of intellectual property, where you normally have maybe like a 10-15% rule for making photocopies, but when you do photocopy an entire textbook or the likes, there is a challenge. Of course, I had already talked about things like joint research. So whether it's with a student, or sometimes they're even collaborating across institutions or with someone outside, it does raise lots of questions around who owns intellectual property that's generated. The other part is also in the commercialization of research results. So sometimes you have come up with a brilliant invention, we've come up with something, and then it's moving to the stage now of commercialization. Someone has secured an intellectual property right, you're trying to get money from it, and a third party takes that and begins that art of commercialization. But again, where does the ownership lie? Now, of course, we've talked a lot already this morning around online platforms and innovative, new innovative ways, including leveraging tools like AI. Now, again, this is raising a lot of questions around ownership of intellectual property, and I think it's important to think about that. And the last one I wanted to just mention is obviously the informal education sector, that there's a lot of informal exchange. And at the heart of that, again, there's a lot of creativity that is being exchanged. And how do you manage things, questions, especially around intellectual property? Now, because of time, I'll just skip through who we are, in terms of going deeply into it. But I think just to give the context that with the work that we do in Nigeria, I oversee the work of WIPO, which is one of the UN's specialized agencies, with a focus on leading the development of a balanced and effective intellectual property system that enables innovation and creativity for the benefit of all. Now, what we strive to see is to see a world where innovation and creativity from anywhere is supported by intellectual property for the good of everyone. And just showing the heat map here, while our head office is in Geneva, we do have about 7 offices outside of Geneva, and we're really glad to have one in Nigeria. Now, in Nigeria, we've been working since 2020 when the office was established here in Nigeria for the first time on the continent. In sub-Saharan Africa, I beg your pardon, we have another office in Algeria. But we've been working to really promote awareness raising, training and capacity building across the field of IP. And this is why when my dear brother and friend asked about speaking at this meeting today, I think it was very clear that this sits squarely around what we're trying to do. And I think educators are really at the heart of a lot of what has been driving the implementation of our mandates, even in Nigeria. Now, just again to mention what intellectual property is. Now, just to say that we're referring generally to creations of the mind, right? And when we think about why we have an IP system or an intellectual property system, it's because we're trying to safeguard the interests of creators and other people who produce intellectual goods and services by giving them the rights to control the use made of their productions. So at the heart of intellectual property is really the question on innovation and creativity. So the IP system is a system that seeks to drive innovation and creativity. And as a legal system, something that can be enforced, you're trying to say anyone who comes up with a new innovation or comes up with a creative output deserves to have rights that could be safeguarded. to be able to prevent further uses of their intellectual property without their own permission. I like to think about it just the same way you look at physical property. The same way you can say, I parked my car here. I don't want somebody else to drive the car, so I lock it. Or I don't allow somebody else into my house, and so I lock it. Or maybe I decide that instead of parking the car, I allow someone to use it. I hire it out for use, and I'm generating money from it. It's the very, very same principle around intellectual property. And so whether it's an invention or a creative output, you also have the right to generate and to make strategic choices that help you to generate revenue from your intellectual property. And so, like I said, it really helps people to earn recognition and financial benefit from the things that they create. Now, there are two main reasons why we think a lot about intellectual property and we really push the system. First is just the moral justification, and that's the natural right that a creator has in his or her creation. And so when we talked about the scenarios at the beginning, for example, whether it's the music students that came up with a new piece and does feel like, oh, but this is my piece, why should somebody else claim it as theirs? Or even a student and the professor who have worked together. And then the question is, when there's something that comes at a minimum, why isn't there a question of joint ownership? Why does all my own effort then just go under the bin? And so there's a moral question which links to the natural right that a creator has in his or her creation. The other aspect of intellectual property is what I said at the beginning, is that the IP system is a system to drive innovation and creativity. And so this is the instrumental justification that when you give people these tools and these rewards, then people will spend more time innovating and creating. Taking an example from this student-professor scenario, I found that a lot of students are very demotivated to bring their best in an exchange with the professor because they feel it's going to be taken from them anyway. Now, if there were clear guidelines that, oh, well, if anything comes out of this, then there's going to be a question on joint ownership, or because you've done more of the work, you would have the first name on the publication. If that was a discussion that happened at the outset, you would find that there's a lot more motivation, a lot more incentive from all parties to such a research output. And the ultimate beneficiary is the society, because it means that the best of people's intellect, the best of people's efforts are now being driven to come up with these innovative outputs. And so this is the second aspect, the instrumental justification that underlies why we have an IP system. Now, a few of the common IP forms, I wouldn't spend too much time on this, but you have like trademarks, patents, copyrights, trade secrets, the graphical indications, industrial designs, plant varieties, even questions on traditional knowledge. And why I break this down is because, like the first responder, when we had, no, second responder, sorry, when we were talking about the music scenario, had said, he had tried to break down that there were different intellectual properties involved in that single scenario. So there could be questions on copyright, which are different from questions on patents, which are different from questions on trademarks. And it's an understanding of all of this that even helps people to know what their rights really are. So for example, that student who came up with a piece, the student owns the music, yes, but the student does not own the recording of that music. Now, the person who recorded a music piece, so if we're having a recording of this session, it's the person who actually is recording that owns it. It's not even the organizers of the events that own it. And that's why the person who is paid to do a job as part of his or her engagement could be told, you're recording for this. And so because they paid that, that's why the organizers get this. But if it was just you were walking by the street and you heard music in the bus station and you brought out your phone and you recorded it, ultimately, that recording belongs to the person who recorded it. So again, it's another form of conversation, which is why someone can say, yes, you own the intellectual property, but I don't give you permission to distribute my song because I still own the tunes and the melodies. So there's all of that. But when we're talking about these things, the awareness and the understanding helps us to start to develop the right kind of structures that allow for a free flow of information, where people don't feel that they need to hide back or herd back their information of the best of who they are. But everyone knows that my rights, I understand my rights, and I can actually assert governance over those. Now, like I said, because of time, maybe I'll just go to copyright, where I think we have a lot more in the context of education. And I think the rights of authors in their literary and artistic works is such a key part of the exchange that happens in the educational setup. Now, for copyright, remember, it also protects just the form of expression of ideas and not the ideas themselves. So when you think about the protection of copyright, you don't even need to, it's one of those intellectual property forms that you don't even need to go and register. You basically can just, the fact that you've written something, or the fact that you have recorded something, we use the word fixed it, automatically copyright subsists in it. So if you follow, that's why, for example, if students are given an assignment and all of them write and send in their assignments to the school, now the copyright in the assignments belongs to the students, to each individual student, right? So that's why a teacher can't just take a student's script and then change the name and push it out as his or hers. We were at a school very recently, and a student asked this very question, and one of the professors got up very, very upset and said, but the students don't know anything. Everything that comes into that they get. I mean, we are the ones that taught them. I wrote, I copied, I revised everything. So why should the students even think they have a right over anything that comes out of? And I think it was sad to hear, but I think it was also a reflection of the cultural context that sometimes you also face within the student educator exchange. And when students understand their IP, educators do so too, then it then creates a new way of thinking about knowledge that's generated in a way that makes it safe for everyone. And so maybe just to say that from the copyright perspective, you have, like I said, you have moral and you have economic rights. The moral rights are essentially the rights to say the work of someone. You have two basic moral rights, and one of them is to say a person who has come up with a copyrightable piece, that person cannot have the work altered without his or her knowledge. And the other part is that the person cannot have another person claim to be the owner of that work when it really belongs to the person. Now, of course, on the economic rights, you just have the right to make more money, make money generally from the things that you do. So whether it's reproducing it, is adapting it into a play, whatever it is that you've come up with. But those two forms of rights are what subsist for the copyright owner. And of course, the other point to make is that in terms of protection, while it doesn't even require you to register it formally, you also find out that copyright is one of those forms that has an extended period of protection. So it protects the person for the entire lifetime of the author, plus 70 years after the person is gone. And so it means that people who understand copyright and who are coming up with new creative works are also creating things that their families and their estates can enjoy even when they pass on. And again, which is why we think it's so important to make sure we have the strong structures in place. Now, just so that, because of in the interest of time, let me just go to what I think we should do. I think, of course, we need to spend a bit more time around the policy design. And I think I'm really glad because, of course, the government is about to announce a national IP policy. And in that policy, it does talk about intellectual property. and the importance of even making sure that educators and the likes are really empowered with intellectual property as part of a national vision going down the line. But I think not just at the national level, I think it's important that there at institutional levels, people who set up educational platforms, I think it's important that we think, even if it's just a paragraph, around what would be the IP, what are the IP considerations? What kind of policies will govern the management of our IP that is generated on these platforms or through these spaces? And I think it's a really honorable thing. We've had to work with a number of schools who've come to say, how can we infuse this into our design? And I think it's a really good thing to do. The other thing I feel that we can do is to actively integrate IP education into both curricular and extracurricular activities. One of the things we've done at WIPO, for example, is to provide what we call a general introduction to IP course. And that general introduction to IP course, it's available to everyone. I mean, and we are, maybe I will also push it on this, through this platform, to say if there is anyone who wishes to, again, take advantage of that course. It's a certificate-based course, but it gives a general introduction to intellectual property. And the benefits we feel is that once people have that knowledge, not limited to any specific discipline, but across all disciplines, the creativity that comes with it as a medical doctor, as an engineer, everyone begins to see how the work they're doing is also generating intellectual property and can take the right steps to protect and to really maximize that for their benefits. I think it's also important to continue to work to foster cultures of innovation and creativity. It's also great to create safe spaces where we can have these healthy conversations on IP, noting the cultural context. Many times, because people feel like there is a learner cannot own IP. Many younger people are not even able to safely have those conversations. And I think it's very important to be able to create that kind of forum. And I think the final thing I want to put there is just the need to also develop effective enforcement structures. Now, I'm not sure if the tone of my conversation has really focused a lot more on the students. But when I was preparing this, I was really thinking both from two sides. Now, I think a lot of educators have also struggled with the sense of we are also generating intellectual property. In the exchange, in working, in mentoring, there's a lot of exchange that happens in which IP is also generated. And it's important even for educators to feel safe in how they are able to use what they know is theirs. And I think that's, again, part of this healthy conversations on IP and the design of effective frameworks that are required. And so I think with that, I will just bring my presentation to an end, and I'm very happy to take any questions that we may have. Fortunately, the meeting that I mentioned, people are delayed. But if there's any question, I still have a few minutes before I have to run. Thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you very much, sir. Please, let's give him a round of applause. Okay, does anyone have any question? Please, let's ask questions now that we still have him on the call.
As a tutor, if you've prepared your notes, taking references from different places and different publishers, and you give your student that same note, whose intellectual property is it? And can you actually lay claim on that as your own personal intellectual property?
Good morning, and thanks so much for that question. Absolutely. If as a tutor, you have prepared your lecture notes and you pass it on to students to share, you have every right to lay claim to those notes. In fact, what we always encourage tutors to do is to specifically tell students as they receive it, you can make you can make decisions like, I don't want you to share it beyond my class. We recently had a Harvard training, and Harvard gave us notes that we could use, but then it was specifically told us that we couldn't use those notes beyond the class that we were having. They also gave us a time window within which we could access the notes. So they said after 6 months, we couldn't use the notes anymore. So what I'm saying is that all of that is the right of the tutor to decide, because you own the intellectual property. So yes.
Thank you, sir. There's another question.
So recently I've been seeing educators trying to create their own learning materials. And sometimes I see the similarities between these materials and Twinkle and all of that. Now, yes, you might change the colors, you might change the borders, you might put your own logo and all that. But what I'm seeing is what I saw on Twinkle. And you are claiming you created that learning material, putting it online. There's a particular name coming on my head, but I'm not going to say it. Putting it online, then you're making it yours. So Twinkle did that same thing using their own platform to provide such material. Then all you did was to change the logo and the colors, but the same content. So I don't know. So do they have the right to do that? One, and if they do have the right to do that, should they reference Twinkle since it's the same question or it's the same material? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think very simple, very straightforward. Now, when we talk about copyright protection, if you're coming up with something that you claim is yours, that is new, the big question is your work has to be original. Now, so originality is the underlying word. The content may be similar. The main thrust of the content may be similar. I can come to your class as we're speaking now, and I say, I give you a lecture on a specific topic, and I tell everybody here to write what they've understood for publication. It's going to be different, even though everyone's going to be writing about the same thing, right? But everyone is going to express it in their own original way. And so what copyright fights against is copying. And so if you have substantially copied another work and you just change things like the logo and the light, absolutely you have stolen somebody else's work, and the law comes strongly for you against that. And so it's one of those practices that, of course, we're trying to sensitize people on, that it's absolutely wrong to do that. You can read someone else's work, you can be inspired by it, then you can write your own in a way that is your own original expression, and you can publish that. Nobody can hold you for that. But you cannot take somebody else's work, change a few things, and then say it's yours. You have breached the moral rights, as well as the economic rights in this instance, because the person is making money from it, of the original copyright holder's work.
Thank you very much, sir. That was very clear. Any other question? We've not heard from the men. I think we are clustered in this direction.
I think I run. Well, if there's no other question, let me just.
One more question, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. Knowledge shared. Many a times as teachers, we create new methods of teaching in class. And over time, 1 year, 2 years, you see that such methods kind of improve class engagements as well as performance. So my question is, how can such a teacher commercialize that knowledge as well as protect it? You get?
Sorry, okay, I think I understand. I think I didn't hear the first premise very clearly, but.
Okay, what I said many a times in class, teachers create new knowledge, and 1 year, 2 years, same knowledge proven to improve class engagements and kind of, improve performance as well. So how can such a teacher commercialize that knowledge as well as protect it?
Thank you. Very, very,
Like,
very good
what
question.
steps can they take in protecting such knowledge?
Okay. I think it's a very good question. I would just say that's actually is a long response that I would normally need to take on that. But I think very simply, I would say it's important. It's number one, it's good that the teacher recognizes that the work that they're doing is creating specific results. They have a unique edge. And I think it's important to be able to document that as you understand it. I think it's also important you might look at ways to either publish your own unique method, right? And you can, of course, on the one hand, you can look at the copyright in itself, in which case you can come up with like a book, resources. When I was going to get an appointment as a professor in Canada, I remember that one of the books I relied on was from a former professor who had documented her teaching experience. She calls it The Professor is In. Now, everything you need to know about the job market, she documented it. And she came up with a very unique selling book, which is like the bestseller in North America. Now, anyone who wants to do something like that refers to that book. So that's one way that people have been able to commercialize. She, in fact, she resigned from the school. And then, sorry, is my time up? I'm just looking to you for signals. But then the other part, just to mention, you said in terms of commercial, but I was also going to say that you might have a unique technology that you think has worked for you, and you can seek to trademark or patent it. So you can put a trademark on that. So there's some professors or tutors who say this is our unique teaching method. They've gotten a protection for it so that other people who use it or who want to license it and say, oh, can we use your method in our sessions? They come to you for approval, but they can do that because you already have the intellectual property right on that. Now, I'm happy to speak to you further. Is it? Everyone's right. Okay. All right. So I'm happy to speak to you further on that. But they've come to call me now for my meeting, so maybe we can exchange contacts right after, and I'll be happy to give a few more suggestions on that. But
Okay,
thank you
sir.
very much,
Well,
everyone.
thank you very much. Please let's give a brief. Thank you so much, sir. We've learned immensely today, and we're definitely taking you up on that. He asked that the person that asked the question should exchange contact so that he can guide further. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you, sir, and thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.